大家好，我是小陈小棉。我最近采访的这位先生，他的名字叫亚历山大·梅库里斯 （Alexander Makulis）。他是一位希腊裔的英国律师、记者和节目主持人。他在英国和欧盟的法律、媒体和政治事务方面有丰富的经验。他是广受欢迎的油管频道杜兰 （Duran） 的编辑，并且一直是一位备受追捧的政治和经济分析师和评论员。我经常看他的节目，我很喜欢杜兰这个节目，非常有幸能够请到他，跟他聊了很多事情，包括俄乌战争，包括英国的保守党，还有就是中国对西方的看法等等。希望大家喜欢。
By the way, the one Chinese city I know pretty well is Shanghai. I mean, I went there. I find it's, by the way, the most exciting city I have ever visited anywhere in the world. I find it a most extraordinary place. Very, very complicated city.
But
I mean, the dynamism and energy about Shanghai is astonishing. I've also been to Nanjing. I've also been to some of the places nearby, Suzhou, for example. I've never been to Beijing, which is rather strange. But Shanghai is, and you haven't absolutely, but Shanghai is extraordinary. I absolutely agree. I mean, it is an amazing place. And again, you have this very strange disjunction of a Chinese, entirely Chinese city, but you have these remnants of the Western time there, you know, the French concession, the Bund, all of those things. It's the most interesting city in every way.
The Shanghai, the French concession is where my grandfather had a house there.
Right, okay. So. And I have to say, the Shanghai Museum, National Museum, is one of my favorite museums on planet Earth. I bought lots of prints, you know, reproductions of Chinese pictures. I have a mania for Chinese art, which is we could talk about. I could talk about for hours, but we won't do that today. But anyway, everything that you said, I can completely understand. If you just visit China, your impressions of the country are so much at variance with what you see. You read about it in the West. It is very difficult sometimes to convey to Westerners how false their image is. But one of the things I do say to people in the West is that I have never seen in any part of the world I know people so obviously relaxed and straightforwardly happy as you see in Shanghai. Now that is a very difficult thing to explain, but you know, especially you know in London nowadays, and everybody looks stressed, and you know, China don't feel that way. And you know, tell people this, and it's difficult for people to understand. The other thing I will say this is, of course, I am unusual. My wife and I are unusual, so we visit places that we Westerners don't go to. We went to the tomb of Sun Yat-sen, for example, on the Purple Mountain. Ask most Westerners who Sun Yat-sen is, and they have absolutely no idea who you're talking about. And we were the only when we went there, we were the only Westerners there. And we were very, very moved by how Chinese people responded to us when we were there, how both surprised and delighted they were to see us there. So, you know, we are, you know, what a person, and in fact, now that I think about it, this is not chance, this is pure chance, but I'm wearing the watch. Whilst I was there with Sun Yat-sen's face. My wife has the companion watch worn with a picture of his wife. That's just chance. It's just my usual watch. Anyway, there we go. So that's my experience of modern China. But ancient, you know, old China, I know an awful lot more because as a student, I got interested first in Indian things and then in Chinese things, but in a level-headed way, not the way that some people in the West do. And bear in mind, I'm of Greek ancestry, so I don't have all the complexes and racial concepts and ideas and fixations that people in England to a great extent still do, and people in the United States also do. But I mean, I don't even understand them, to be honest.
Now Shanghai just has a long tradition being a very commercial, you know, so it's a very dynamic city. Yes, indeed. So I want to ask you, I mean, I have a lot of questions. So I I have three parts. I divided them into three parts. The first is about Ukraine. I have a few questions about that. And then a bunch of questions about UK related. And then the last part is probably Western in general. So those are
Yeah,
the
of course, that's
three
right.
parts.
And I've got as long as you need, so you know.
Okay, great. Okay,
Okay.
so the first question, just as you know, as we schedule this time, then of course the drone hit crumbling. Okay. So I said, okay, this is my first question. So who do you think did it and why? What does that accomplish, really?
Right, I have absolutely no doubt it was done by Ukraine, by the Ukrainian authorities. There have been various incidents in Russia, train derailments. There was that explosion on the bridge in Crimea. There's been a number of murders that have happened in Moscow. In every single case, Ukrainian authorities have denied it. In every single case, a Ukrainian trace has been discovered. The US authorities have said informally through leaks strategically placed in the media, the New York Times, for example, that they know that it is the Ukrainians who are doing this. And over this attack on the Kremlin, well, the Ukrainians have now published a postage stamp actually celebrating this event. So I don't think it is any doubt at all that it was done by Ukraine. Now, what did they hope to achieve by this? I think they had two immediate objectives, two particular objectives. One, perhaps they were hoping to hurt or injure or even perhaps even kill, assassinate the Russian president. That's what the Russians themselves say. The building that is located in the Kremlin, which was targeted by these drones, was the building in which Putin has his office. And by the way, it's the same office that was formerly used by Joseph Stalin and other Russian leaders. So it's a building as famous to Russians as, say, the White House is to Americans. So I think that's the first point to say about that. So I think they were perhaps saying to themselves, well, there's just a chance we might get Putin himself, and that would paralyze Russia's leadership. It might create a political crisis there. It might create political turmoil. That will work perhaps to our advantage. The other possibility is that they might have been hoping to topple the Russian flag, which flies over this building, which would have been an act of very great symbolic importance. So why did they do it? Well, firstly, to give encouragement to their own people who are under continuous missile and drone attacks from the Russians. The second, to embarrass the Russian government. There is a third reason, and that is I am sure that they were hoping, beyond any hopes of killing Putin, creating a political crisis, they were hoping to goad the Russians, to provoke the Russians into an overreaction, massive missile attacks and that kind of thing on Kiev, which would have enabled the Ukrainians to come to the West and say, look, we're under this enormous attack from the Russians. We need your help. We need more help than you have been giving us up to now. We might even want you to come into Ukraine and help us directly in that way. So I think that last reason is the single most important one. In other words, it was intended to provoke the Russians into an overreaction, which the Ukrainians would then be able to leverage to their advantage.
I pretty much, I think you're right, but I have this question. Now, Zelensky himself is aware of this, I guess. If he didn't downright order it, at least he knows about it. So he kind of left, right? He ran away because he's afraid of the retaliations. Well, but is he going to run away forever? I mean, he's going to come back at some point. Doesn't he afraid that once he's back in Kiev or somewhere, then he get attacked or something? Isn't he afraid of that?
Well, you would have thought so. Can I just say the whole behavior of Zelensky over the last couple of days is both strange and I think in some ways destabilizing for Ukraine itself. He disappeared from Kiev completely unannounced. He appeared in Finland, about the same time as these drones were striking the Kremlin, which to my mind all but confirms that he was certainly had foreknowledge of what was happening and was, as you rightly say, getting himself out of harm's way, hiding, if you prefer. And now he's on this very strange, very mysterious tour of Europe. No real explanation of when he intends to be back. He turned up in The Hague. He's now said to be on his way to Berlin. There's some rumors he's going to stop in London and attend the King's coronation, all that kind of thing. So I don't know what his eventual plan is. I presume at some point he is going to return to Ukraine. But it's not a good look, actually. It suggests a president who is in hiding and who's running away. And I can't imagine that this is going to make him particularly popular in Ukraine at a time when his popularity, by most reports, is already slipping. Now, bear in mind, Ukraine is supposed to be launching a counteroffensive. It's been much talked about. You would expect the president of the country, the commander-in-chief, to be in the country taking personal charge when that offensive is launched. So again, from that point of view, it is not a good look. What Zelensky's eventual plans are, I simply don't know. I don't think anybody can be sure. And there is another factor, which is that there's constant rumors and speculation that his political position in Kiev itself isn't solid, that there are people both more hardline than himself and others who are not, and that they're maneuvering around him, and that one of his purposes in going to the West is to try to enlist Western support, particularly at a time when the Americans are said to be unhappy with him because he called President Xi Jinping, the president of China, without getting America's permission in advance and without even telling the Americans that he was going to do it. So there may be all kinds of explanations for Zelensky's moves and actions, but he's a strange man in some ways, not always an easy man to understand. And as I said, what he eventually intends to do and how he eventually intends to return to Kiev, I'm not really able to say. And I don't think anybody, perhaps not even himself, could probably answer that question.
Yeah, that's my feeling. Maybe he doesn't even know his next step himself. So that's quite possible. Yeah. The other question that I have is about Poland. There's so much talking about Poland might get involved. So how do you say Poland can get involved? I don't quite understand that. Can you explain?
Yes, well, I mean, I think the first thing to explain is that there's a very long history between Poland and what is now called Ukraine. A lot of the territories that today form Ukraine were previously part of Poland. The old Polish state, the so-called Polish Commonwealth, at the height of its power in the 17th century, included vast territories in what is today Ukraine. And when Poland regained its independence from the Tsarist Empire, the Russian Empire, after the First World War, it held on to some of these territories in Ukraine. It controlled the city of Lviv in the west. This is a sort of Catholic area. There was a Polish population there. And of course, Poland lost these territories during the Second World War, when, by the way, it received very extensive territories in compensation at the expense of Germany, but that's a complicated story. Anyway, some people in Poland have never forgotten the fact that they lost these territories and they want to go back into Ukraine to take them back. There's also the issue that some people in Poland, particularly the Polish government, have a long-standing grievance against Russia. Russia has been an adversary of Poland for many centuries. Russia partitioned, divided up Poland with Prussia and Austria, the German states as they then were in the 18th century. It ruled large areas of Poland right through the 19th century up to the time of the Russian Revolution. There was the Second World War, which made history even more complicated, and there were problems afterwards. So there's this long history of antagonism between Poland and Russia. And there's also been this long history of Poland having an interest in Ukraine. So the two have come together, and some officials in the Polish government seem to think that if things go wrong for Ukraine in this war, this is Poland's chance to right the wrongs of the past, go back into Ukraine, reclaim its old territories, and at the same time keep the Russians at bay, keep them further away from Poland's current borders. I think this would be a disastrous mistake. I think it would extend the Ukrainian war, Ukrainian conflict, into Poland itself. I think many European countries, especially Germany and others, would be extremely worried if such a thing were to happen, and would not want to be drawn into a Polish-Russian conflict, which they saw as a Polish land grab. And over and above and beyond all of that, I think the Polish military doesn't want to be involved. And I think many people in Poland, a country with which I have many contacts, by the way, would be also dead set against this thing. So it's not certain it's going to happen. And if it does happen, it'll be a high risk venture, which will come in for a lot of criticism and opposition.
Yeah, that's my question. It sounds to me like it doesn't really help Ukraine. It hurts Ukraine, right? If they're going to grab more, so Ukraine, instead of just fighting the Russia, now they're going to fight both Russia and Poland, because Poland wants to take their territory, right? So I don't see how Poland can justify with some kind of supporting the Ukraine by taking part of Ukraine. I don't think it's making any sense. That's my.
Well, it doesn't make sense. I mean, what they would try to make it look like is that they're not going into Ukraine to seize Ukrainian territory. They're going into Ukraine to protect the local people from the Russians, and that they're establishing some kind of a protectorate over Western Ukraine. But, you know, that would wear thin, I think, very quickly. And as you absolutely rightly said, it would be the division of Ukraine between Russia and Poland. And even if the Russians were to agree to it, which I don't think they would, by the way, for many reasons, I think there would be many, many problems ultimately for Ukraine itself. A Polish friend of mine put it very simply: it would be a disaster for Ukraine, but it would also be the destruction of the Polish state as it exists now.
Yeah.
It would be Poland expanding and including an occupied territory with large numbers of people who don't consider themselves Polish. So I think that a lot of people in Poland who are very patriotic would oppose this. And I think a lot of people around the world, if they saw it as a Polish land grab, which it would be, would feel that, you know, Ukraine had been betrayed.
Yeah, I mean, as if Europe doesn't have enough problem. So I would think the EU should very much agree, against it too. But we'll see. Sometimes they lost their mind with their hatred towards Russia. It's like whatever you do, if you're somehow against Russia, that's acceptable. That's how I feel.
I'm afraid that is exactly right.
Okay.
I mean, but that is an elite outlook. Eventually, people who have to pay the bills and support a Polish adventure in Ukraine might feel less happy about doing that. So, the mood can change also.
Okay.